The Stanford Prison Experiment. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo wanted to see what happens when you put good people in an evil place. He took 24 college students and split them into guards and prisoners in a fake basement jail. The plan was for 2 weeks of observation, but the guards became sadistic almost immediately, using psychological torture and sleep deprivation. The prisoners had mental breakdowns, and one even went on a hunger strike. It got so bad that Zimbardo's girlfriend had to step in and tell him he'd lost his mind. The experiment was shut down after only 6 days, proving that people will become monsters if you give them a badge and a pair of sunglasses. Unit 731. This is widely considered the darkest chapter in the history of science. During World War II, the Imperial Japanese Army set up a secret facility in China dedicated to biological warfare research. They didn't use lab rats. They used thousands of human maruta, or logs. They performed vivisections without anesthesia because they thought it would ruin the results. They tested the effects of high-pressure chambers on human eyes and infected victims with the bubonic plague to see how fast they would rot. When the war ended, the US gave the lead scientists immunity in exchange for their data. So yeah, modern medicine has some blood on its hands. The Monster Study. In 1939, Wendell Johnson wanted to see if stuttering was a learned behavior. He took 22 orphan children and divided them. Half were praised for their speech, but the other half were ridiculed and told they were developing a terrible stutter. The kids in the negative group didn't just start stuttering, they became socially withdrawn and developed lifelong psychological trauma. They were orphans with no one to protect them, used as human lab rats for a theory that ended up being wrong anyway. The university kept it a secret for decades to protect Johnson's reputation. Project MK Ultra. During the Cold War, the CIA became obsessed with mind control. They believed the Soviets had mastered it, so they started their own program. They gave high doses of LSD to unsuspecting citizens, prisoners, and even their own agents to see if they could break the human mind and rebuild it. They used sensory deprivation, verbal abuse, and even electroconvulsive therapy. Most of the files were destroyed in 1973, so we'll never know the full extent of the damage. It sounds like a creepypasta, but it's 100% real government history. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study. In 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service began a study on 600 black men to track the progression of untreated syphilis. The men were told they were being treated for bad blood, but they were actually given placebos. Even when penicillin became the standard cure in 1947, the researchers withheld it just to see what the disease would do to the human body. It lasted for 40 years until a whistleblower finally leaked it to the press. By then, dozens had died, and many had passed the disease to their wives and children. The Third Wave. High school teacher Ron Jones wanted to explain to his students how the German public could have allowed the rise of the Nazis. He started a movement in his classroom called the Third Wave, emphasizing discipline and community. By day 5, the movement had grown so large and aggressive that students were reporting on each other for not following the rules. Jones had to shut it down by showing the students a film of a Nazi rally, telling them they had become exactly what they thought they were superior to. It's the ultimate proof that it can happen here. The Milgram Experiment. In the 1960s, Stanley Milgram wanted to see how far people would go to obey authority. He told participants to deliver electric shocks to a learner in another room every time they got a question wrong. The shocks weren't real, and the learner was an actor screaming in fake agony, but the participants didn't know that. Even when the learner went silent, implying they had been game-ended, 65% of people kept flipping the switch just because a guy in a lab coat told them to. It proved that most of you are just one official-looking clipboard away from becoming a villain. Project 4.1. In 1954, the U.S. conducted a nuclear test in the Marshall Islands called Castle Bravo. It was way more powerful than expected, and radioactive fallout rained down on the local islanders. Instead of just treating them, the government started Project 4.1 to study the effects of radiation on humans. They didn't tell the islanders what was happening, effectively using them as a living laboratory to see how long it takes a population to develop thyroid cancer. It's the ultimate whoopsie turned into a top secret science project. The Guatemala Syphilis Study. If you thought Tuskegee was bad, this is its more aggressive cousin. From 1946 to 1948, U.S. researchers actively infected over 1,300 Guatemalan prisoners, soldiers, and mental patients with syphilis and other diseases. They didn't just watch it progress. They used unusual methods to ensure the infection took hold, including direct injections. The goal was to test the effectiveness of penicillin, but they didn't get around to treating everyone. The U.S. didn't officially apologize for this one until 2010. Vladimir Demikov's two-headed dog. Soviet scientist Vladimir Demikov was a pioneer in organ transplants, but he had a very mad scientist way of showing it. In the 1950s, he surgically attached the head and upper body of a puppy onto the neck of a full-grown German Shepherd. Both heads could eat and drink, but the bodies would inevitably reject each other, game-ending the creature within days. He did this 20 times. While it paved the way for modern heart transplants, it mostly just gave the world a permanent reason to be terrified of Soviet laboratories. The plutonium files. In the Manhattan Project, scientists were worried about what plutonium would do to the human body. To find out, they injected 18 unsuspecting patients who thought they were getting medical treatment with high doses of radioactive plutonium. They wanted to see how long the body retained the material before it game-ended the host. Most of the victims were never told they were part of an experiment. They were just data points in a government ledger. The Aversion Project. In the 1970s and 80s, the South African apartheid army wanted to cure their soldiers of their forbidden preferences. Led by Dr. Aubrey Levin, the project used a mix of chemical castration and massive electric shock therapy to try and rewrite the soldiers' brains. When the shocks didn't work, they forced some of the soldiers into gender reassignment surgeries against their will, then dumped them back into civilian life. It was a factory of trauma disguised as a military necessity. Operation Sea Spray. In 1950, the U.S. Navy spent 6 days spraying a harmless bacteria called Serratia marcescens over the city of San Francisco to see how a biological weapon would spread in a coastal city. It turns out the bacteria wasn't as harmless as they thought. It caused a massive spike in pneumonia and urinary tract infections, even game-ending one patient in a local hospital. The public didn't find out they had been part of a massive biowarfare drill until 1976. The Stateville Penitentiary Malaria Study. During World War II, the U.S. needed a cure for malaria for soldiers in the Pacific. They decided the best place to find one was Stateville Penitentiary. Over 400 prisoners were infected with the disease. While the government claimed it was voluntary, the pressure of being in prison makes that word do a lot of heavy lifting. The experiment was actually praised at the time, even used at the Nuremberg trials as a defense by Nazi doctors to say that, look, the Americans do it too. The Chamber. The Soviet Secret Services operated a laboratory simply known as the Chamber. Their goal was to find a tasteless, odorless poison that couldn't be detected during an autopsy. They tested various chemicals, including mustard gas and ricin, on prisoners from the gulags. The researchers would observe the victims as they became vegetables or game-ended, often while hiding behind one-way glass. It's the kind of science that makes you realize the Cold War was actually boiling hot for the people trapped in these labs.